Hey everyone, here's chapter 6, the muscular system. So this starts out showing you the different types of muscle. There are three types of muscle: skeletal, smooth, and then cardiac. So skeletal muscle is the muscle we all think of when we think of muscular system. And they have a striated or striped appearance that I'll show you later. And they move our bones. So every muscle that you're probably thinking of, other than the heart, is skeletal muscle. And then smooth muscle is the most different of the three, and it's in our organs like blood vessels and digestive system that moves things around our body. And the difference is it is not striated and just looks different than the other two types of muscle. And then cardiac muscle is only in the heart. There is also smooth muscle in the heart and the blood vessels. And cardiac muscle looks kind of like skeletal. It contracts kind of like skeletal, but it has a little difference that makes it unique. And we're going to focus on the skeletal muscle from this chapter. So here's the three types. You can see that skeletal, if you see the little like stripes, the up and down stripes, and then cardiac also has the little stripes. Those are the striations. And then smooth muscle does not have those. That's why it's called smooth. Skeletal is the only voluntary muscle, and smooth and cardiac are both involuntary, meaning that you don't need to think about it for them to contract. So here's some common muscles that you might know about or have heard about in your body. And then are these the same? Yeah, I think these are all the same, and these are like what they do. So this picture might be more helpful. So definitely use that as you're working through things. For section 2, we'll look at how the muscles work and what they look like, how they actually contract. So they are putting force on your bones or whatever. They work in pairs. I'll look at the figure for that. But you've got one pair that does the action and the other pair that goes against the action that kind of undoes it. And then you have some that help that are synergistic. So look at figure 6.5 for that. If it's not on the slideshow here, it might be right here. I'm not sure. And then the structure is made of lots of little fibers. It's kind of like a Twizzler pull and peel, where you just keep pulling the same fibers over and over, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And once you zoom into like the microscopic cellular level, that's what's actually doing the contracting. And then you've got tendons that kind of group the muscle fibers together and attach them to bones. And you can have injuries there and diseases that occur in the tendons that can cause a lot of pain. So there's a tendon showing all these muscle fibers grouped together, and then a tendon attaching to the bone there. So the way that muscles work is they work like levers, like you might have learned about in like a physics class. There's always an origin where the muscle is kind of anchored, and then the insertion is attached to another bone and it moves the bone. And you're never going to have, like, probably not going to have this one muscle attached to the same bone. That wouldn't make any sense, because it has to actually pull the muscle and pull another bone. So for example, here the origin of this bicep is up here on the top of the humerus, the head of the humerus, and then it inserts on the radius, and it's going to contract and pull that bone up. So that's what muscles do. And then the tricep is the opposite. So when the bicep is contracting, the tricep is relaxing, and vice versa. If you want to lengthen your arm, you're going to contract your tricep, and they work in pairs. So that's how they work. There's different types of muscles that people can have, and some people have different amounts of these different types. There's slow or red muscles and fast or white muscles. Sometimes they're called slow twitch and fast twitch. Slow muscles are really good for like long distance endurance kind of things. So people who are good at long distance endurance probably have more slow twitch muscles. And then fast twitch are more for like running like a quarter of a mile, really short distances really quickly. And then they kind of, they lose endurance, they peter out. So people have different types of muscles. They have different combinations. And you can see here the slow and fast twitch muscles. Think about how that might affect which event a swimmer might do. Okay, so now how muscles contract. The basic contraction that happens in a muscle is at the cellular or smaller level. It's at the protein level. Your muscles are jam-packed full of proteins, and that's what actually is contracting, and it's called the sarcomere. And you have like millions of these probably in your body, kind of going along the length of your muscles. There are thin and thick filaments that we'll look at, and they slide together, and that's what makes your muscle contract. So here is a muscle fiber, and then you can see down here the thin filaments and the thick filaments, and they slide in and slide together, and that's what makes the muscle actually contract. So the actin slides over the myosin. This is where calcium works. Calcium has to come in and bind, and that allows the actin to slide in. And when you have rigor mortis, that's because you have a bunch of calcium that can't clean out. And so rigor mortis is where you get stiff after death. And it only lasts for like, I want to say like 12 to 24 hours or something. And then they don't have any more, but they just kind of stay in that position after someone dies. Oh yeah, here it is, 24 to 60 hours. And then the muscles are not in rigor mortis. They're softer, but they're still kind of in that, that frozen position. And so here's what's actually happening. This myosin head is the thick filament that we saw before. And then these little beads, that's the thin filament. So the myosin is able to grab onto the actin, the thin filament, and then pull it in. If you can kind of see how it's pulling it together. Let's see if it shows it here. It's pulling it closer. That's the muscle contraction. And so what you're seeing is the thin actin is right here, and then the thick M line is, or myosin is right there, and it's just pulling it together. That's what makes your muscle contract. Okay, to do this though, you need a nerve stimulation. The nervous system has to cause it to contract. And so that's called the motor neuron. That's a type of neuron, a type of nerve cell that makes the muscles contract. And so the nerve impulse ties into what we call the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that kind of surrounds the muscle fiber. And let me see if I can find a picture. So right here is where the nerves are connecting, and then this is going to be the sarcoplasmic reticulum that's coated around the nerve, and it's going to cause calcium to be released, and that's going to trigger, where am I? That's going to trigger the muscle contraction. So essentially the calcium is binding to the troponin, and that moves the tropomyosin out of the way. And then the actin can bind to the myosin and pull it over. So here is the troponin, these little blue things. If it shows it, yeah, calcium is going to come in here and bind. And then it's going to cause these green lines, the tropomyosin, to move out of the way and expose those little spots there. That's on the actin, and then the myosin is going to be able to grab on and pull over the actin, contracting the muscle. If there's no calcium, those binding sites are blocked, and the myosin can't come in and bind. So you're not going to get a muscle contraction. So if you have no calcium, you're not going to be able to have a muscle contraction. This is the axon, this is the nerve ending, and where it's tying into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. You release these little chemicals in this space between the nerve and the muscle, and those are actually called acetylcholine, if you've heard of that, and then they bind to the sarcoplasmic reticulum and cause the muscle to contract. So you've got your axon, that's the end of the neuron, and the synapse is that space, and the neurotransmitter is the chemical that gets released. In order for all this to happen, the muscle needs ATP. This acronym is wrong right here. It should be ATP. So you make ATP from doing cell respiration. When you eat, you break down sugar and starches, you get ATP, and then the muscles use that in order to do that sliding action. So when you contract a muscle and when you relax a muscle, you use ATP. It gets recycled into ADP, and then that can turn back into ATP during cell respiration, or also glycolysis, or even breaking down proteins. Okay, so the muscle itself can either have a weak or strong contraction depending on how much signal it receives. It can also just twitch. If you've heard of tetanus, that's where it's like a forced muscle contraction, and it's much, much stronger than a twitch, and it stays that way. So here's what your muscle fibers look like, and they have these axons that control them. When you're twitching, you just get a little bump there in the muscle contraction. And then tetanus is where it keeps stimulating and you keep contracting. There's two types of exercises that you've probably heard of. One is called isotonic, and that's where you actually like move your muscle. So here the muscle tension is greater than the opposing force, the muscle shortens, and then you lift a light weight. So that's an isotonic contraction. Isometric is where you're contracting your muscle, you're holding like a weight or a force, but you're not moving your bone, you're not moving your muscle up and contracting it. So that's called isometric. If you're doing like physical therapy, if you have like an injury, the physical therapist might start you on isometric and then move up to isotonic where you're actually moving the bone. So then here we have muscle fatigue and recovery. If you have oxygen debt, that can cause fatigue. And so that means that the calcium doesn't stay in the SR and it won't be able to sustain a contraction. Tired muscles also aren't going to be able to lift as much weight as normal. And then here's some muscle diseases you can or injuries. You can get strains or tears, and your muscles can also cramp. That's when the muscles don't relax. That can be from a nutrient deficiency. You can get spasms like a Charlie horse if you've ever had that. You can also get tics, which are just little twitches. You might get one in your eye. And then muscle dystrophy is a disorder, disease. There's a whole bunch of different ones. It destroys muscle tissue, so it causes your muscles to weaken. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is one type, and then myotonic muscular dystrophy. You can also get bacterial infections that can cause problems with the nervous system. And let me see. So the disease that causes, the bacteria that causes tetanus is called botulinum tetani, and it releases a toxin, that bacteria, that is called Botox. So the bacterial infection that causes tetanus releases Botox, which causes your nervous system to like freeze up, and that is the toxin that they use for Botox, if you've heard of that. And then you can also get cancers in your muscles, which are pretty uncommon. So this picture here, A, is the famous picture of tetanus. It was a painting, but that's what people think of when they hear tetanus, and it's just causing all your muscles to become tightened. Okay, so different types of exercise. There's aerobic exercise, which is where you're getting your heart rate up, and then strength training, and both of them are important. And then muscles, this is how muscles can maintain homeostasis. So they help us with keeping our skeleton moving so we can move our body. They also produce heat, so shivering and muscle contractions, that all produces heat. It keeps us warm. Smooth muscle keeps our food moving around our body, and it keeps blood moving around our body. Cardiac muscle moves the blood through our body. And then here are some a basic review to help you summarize the skeletal system.